There's another crisis, of course, facing the UK, and that's the migrant crisis. I'm going to bring in Tony Abbott now. He was Australian PM from 2013 to 15. Let me just give you a statistic here that sums up Abbott's approach to the migrant crisis in Australia. In the first year of his term of office in 2013, there were 20,000 migrants entering Australia illegally by boat. By the end of his term in 2015, there were 0 illegal migrant entries by boat. That's quite a statistic, Mr. Abbott. How on earth did you achieve it?
Well, we basically decided that the boats were going to stop because boats coming at that rate and people entering our country illegally at that rate amounts to a peaceful invasion. And no sovereign country can tolerate its borders being violated by people who just get on boats, land on your shores, and basically if you can get here, you can stay here. So we had to stop that. So we did a number of things. We reinstituted some Howard government's policies, temporary protection visas, offshore processing and turning boats around where it was safe to do so. But we also brought in some initiatives of our own. We had a combined command under Operation Sovereign Borders, which ended the I suppose, dysfunction of different parts of government all doing different things and too many cooks spoiling the broth. We had a news blackout because announcing every single arrival was effectively shipping news for people smugglers. Most importantly, where the people smugglers scuttled their boats, we gave their passengers unsinkable boats and put them back on the water towards Indonesia from whence they'd come. So we had a very determined, very clear set of policies. I can't say they were popular policies. There were lots of claims that these would be against human rights. Some even said they were against international law. But we were absolutely determined to stop the people smuggling trade, to stop the deaths at sea, to keep our country secure and sovereign. And the only way you can do that is by keeping control of your borders.
Well, you talk about the lack of popularity of the policy there, Mr. Abbott. My understanding is that subsequent to you being in power, Labour then obviously took over, tried to reverse it initially, but now these measures remain in place and presumably there are now no migrant arrivals by boat in Australia. Is that still the case?
That is still the case. There was a brief flurry of activity where people smugglers tried to test the resolve of the new Labor government. But to its credit, thus far at least, the new Labor government has maintained the former coalition government's policies. But these policies were bitterly opposed by the Labor Party when we first put them forward. They were very heavily criticised from many, many different quarters while we were actually doing them. But once they worked, they suddenly became quite popular and were embraced by the Labor Party. In the end, this is one of those situations where success creates popularity. And because the policies succeeded, they were widely adopted. And I certainly think there's a lesson there and a potential model there for other countries, such as the United Kingdom, that have got a problem with illegal arrivals by boat.
What do you think has gone wrong with the UK's policy then, Mr. Abbott? I mean, you'll be aware of the legal challenges that have taken place. Do you think perhaps former Home Secretary Priti Patel was a bit short-sighted, that she didn't predict that this would be challenged in the courts?
Well, if you've got a problem with the activist lawyers bringing legal actions to try to frustrate the policy of the government, well, you've simply got to change the law. Now, my understanding is that there's no reason why the UK Parliament couldn't change the law to remove the jurisdiction of the European Court that prevented the removal of boat people to Rwanda. No reason why the law couldn't be changed. And certainly successive governments in Australia confronted with activist lawfare against the government's policy to keep our borders safe, we simply change the law, and that's what you've got to do where the law isn't working.
I just want to move on to another subject now, if you don't mind, Mr. Abbott, because I remember the last time we spoke, I think I covered a tour of Australia by William and Kate. It was when they brought little Prince George along from memory, and you were Australian PM then. What do you make of some of the revelations that have come out into the papers now following the Spanish publication of Spare, Prince Harry's autobiography? I know you know both of these princes. What's your reaction to it?
Well, Camilla, I don't really want to get into a running commentary on anything that Prince Harry has said. I just make the general observation that you shouldn't dump on your family. I know there are all sorts of issues inside families, but the last thing anyone should do is publicly dump on their own family.
And there's some speculation here, Mr. Abbott, that it might lead to calls for a republic, not least in the UK, perhaps not, because popularity for the monarchy remains about 60-40. But over in countries like Australia, where obviously there is a flirtation with the idea of dispensing with the royals, do you think that might strengthen the case or weaken it?
I think there's no doubt that whenever a sort of a soap opera quality afflicts the royal family, that tends to detract from the lustre of the monarchy. But in the end, it's the office, not the office holder, that counts. Let's not forget that King Charles, Prince William have appeared to carry themselves in an exemplary fashion through this time. They've been quite supremely indifferent, if you like, to the kind of things that are being said. And look, if you've got nothing good to say, say nothing. That's a pretty good rule, isn't it? Now, I should also say, well, Camilla, that whatever the issues with Prince Harry and his memoirs and his interviews, I think that the death of the Queen last year and the accession of the King has been a reminder of the importance of the monarchy and how the monarchy contributes to stability and continuity in government, and how the monarchy adds almost a spiritual dimension to our public life. It adds an element of ceremony and pageantry to our public life. It keeps one important part of our public life free of the taint of party politics, and I think this is the great strength of the monarchy, and this is why I hope the monarchy that we share with you endures forever.
Mr. Abbott, while I've got you, I'd like to talk to you very briefly about foreign policy as well. China, Russia, news of a meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping. Obviously, you're closer to that territory than we are in the UK. What are your feelings about the ongoing war in Ukraine, Putin's behaviour? First of all, can you envisage any kind of ceasefire there?
Look, I think there's really only one good answer, and that is for Russia to be driven out of all of the territory that's it's illegally seized from Ukraine. It's waged a war of utmost brutality. It's indiscriminately targeted civilian infrastructure, people's homes. It has killed civilians mercilessly. It's committed war crime after war crime. There's only one satisfactory solution to this, and that is the complete expulsion of Russian forces from the territory of Ukraine. And if we don't get that, that will embolden dictators everywhere, including China's Red Emperor, who obviously has cast covetous glances on Taiwan. And if he thinks he can get away with it, I certainly think he would give it a go. The heroic defence of the Ukrainians and the help that the Ukrainians have been getting from Western countries, particularly countries like Britain, I suspect are giving Xi Jinping pause in any ambitions that he might have to take Taiwan, and that's a very, very good thing.
As a former Prime Minister, what's your analysis of Putin? Mad? Bad? Both?
Well, I think that we've got to take dictators at their word. And when someone like the Russian leader says that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, when he says that Ukraine has no right to exist as an independent country, when he says that it's run by Nazis, palpably false, of course. I think we have to accept that as far as he is concerned, he wants to recreate the Russia of Peter the Great. And that means there can never be an independent Ukraine, there can never be independent Baltic states, there can never really be independence for Georgia and Moldova. Poland is under deadly threat if he gets his way, because these are all territories that for hundreds of years were part of Greater Russia, and of course most of Eastern Europe was under the thrall of the Soviet Union for about 50
Mr. Abbott,
years.
I'm
So
afraid
look,
we're going to have to leave it there.
There is no doubt they have
though.
massive ambitions. Thank you, Camilla.
Thank you very, very much indeed for joining me in Sydney. That was former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott.